Mr. Calvin Lester, former Shreveport City Councilman, attorney, Shreveport guy. Hey, Mr. Calvin, welcome to Keel. How are you this morning?
I am great. How are you doing this morning?
Thank you for joining us. Okay, let's go back to 2007. Sort of give us a sense of the time. Give us a sense of, you were the councilman at the time who introduced what is now known as the Saggy Pants law.
You laid the charge.
Tell us about tell us about 2007. What were you thinking? Why did you come up with that, and did it have public support?
It had a lot of public support. You know, there was what was coming to me as an epidemic of people walking around showing their underwear and other things. And there was tremendous community support for talking to particularly our young people about that style of dress and that whole scenario. The ordinance is not so much about sagging pants. The ordinance is, the city council has the responsibility to speak to what community standards were. And the ordinance was an opportunity for the city council to speak to a standard that said, you know, walking around showing your underwear or your hind parts is not acceptable. And so the ordinance is written in that method.
Calvin, and I'm sorry, Mr. Lester, I apologize.
Calvin is fine.
I know. And I asked you this on the phone, and that's when you said, I'm going to do the interview. I said, if you knew this ordinance was going to be meted out 95% against young African-American men only, would you have still passed it back in 2007?
When we did the ordinance, we had a long conversation with the police chief at the time, Chief Whitehorn, both in committee, in open session, and what have you, and we made it clear. What we did not want was this ordinance to be used disproportionately against any group of people. And we went so far as to say our expectation was not to use this as a means of contact for further police action. You can't go to jail for a sagging pants violation. It was not written that way. There's a reason why there's no jail time associated with it because of that. I was concerned that if someone is arrested, there are a number of warrantless requirements, search warrant requirements, and one of the exceptions to having a search warrant is a search incident to an arrest. That's why we said in the ordinance you cannot be arrested. So if someone was encountered with a sagging pants scenario, the idea was to give them a citation. Obviously, what we wanted them to say is, pull your pants up and keep it moving. And by and large, that's what happened because the police chief at the time chose to enforce the law in the spirit that it was given. This police chief made it very clear in his comments at the meeting I think they had at the funeral home that they used this as a tool. This was not written to be used as a tool.
When did that change? Do you know?
That's a great question. You know, obviously I came off the council in 2010. Chief Whitehorn was still the chief then. I don't know if it happened. I don't know when it happened. I mean, I would be interested to see some graphs and some data on that.
Mr. Calvin, pardon me. We spoke. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
We had sort of asked the same question of former Mayor Glover, and he said that this legislation, the Saggy Pants law, was what became part of Operation Take Back Our Neighborhoods Every Day. The neighborhoods you wanted to take back weren't Southern Trace and probably not Broadmoor. So when you say it wasn't specifically targeted at young black men, it kind of was, wasn't it?
Okay, so it's like this. You don't write laws for any one group of people. That's not what we do. You write a law and say it's a community standard. So anybody that is in violation is subject to it. And I would suggest to you, if you can go to your radio station, there are a lot of people that listen to hip hop music and wear saggy pants that live in Broadmoor. So, I mean, that's more of a young person thing than an ethnic thing. And our concern, if you go back to the transcripts of the city council meetings, we spoke about our young people, particularly our young people. That was a conversation. But you can't write something specifically for young people. That's not what we did. We said we wrote it across the board.
You are supporting this repeal today, correct?
I am. Not because I don't believe in a community standard. Let's be clear. I believe in a community standard. As a parent of a male child and the parent of a female child, I don't want my children walking around seeing people's underwear and their bare behinds. Not in the city that I live in. I don't want to see that. But what I don't want to do is, if when the police are telling me they are racially targeting, that's not what the law was done, and the law needs to be repealed. But I would say to you, this isn't about the ordinance itself. The conversation that we need to have is about how we are policing our communities. We have had different police chiefs with different police styles. We've had the scenario where you've had the quote-unquote, excuse my language, an ass-kicking police chief that knocks in doors and knocks in heads. But I would suggest that when you have those, you're going to pay a lot of money, and the city had, because I was there, in fines and lawsuits and complaints against the police department in the community, right? Mm-hmm. When you had police officers and a police chief that employed a community policing model where you tore down the wall between the police and the community and people were working together, that's how you reduce crime. And that's what has worked.
Calvin, let me ask you this.
Over-aggressive policing is not working. And let me say this also, Aaron. Okay. The Saggy Pants ordinance should not be used as loud music was in the late 90s and early 2000s. Mm-hmm. Okay? There's an ordinance that said loud music. We don't want loud music. Everybody agrees with that. Well, the police were using loud music as an entry point to people's vehicles, right?
Yeah.
Loud music, I'm over here, I'm in your car, I got search incident to an arrest, I've got plain view, I've got reasonable suspicion of probable cause to search and arrest and what have you. It's not about the law. It's not about the law. Because as a community, you have a right, and some would say a responsibility, to speak to your community's standards. What your expectation should be from the police department is the laws should be forced equally across the board and not in a racially determined or predictive manner.
National attention on this, Calvin. National attention on this. Washington Post today, New York Post, focusing on the Anthony Childs case. Let me ask you this. You may not want to answer it. If Anthony Childs was not sagging, do you think he would be alive today?
I don't know. I have some concerns about the Anthony Childs case. I have some concerns about it. I have some concerns that he's accused, allegedly, of firing a firearm at the police officer, but the coroner did not do a gunpowder residue and paraffin test that would easily determine whether or not he fired a weapon. I'm more concerned about that.
Mr. Calvin, what's changed? What's changed? You said when this bill passed, when you introduced it 12 years ago, and it passed, was signed by Mayor Glover, you said there's sort of a consensus among your constituents that it was a good idea. What has changed in the last dozen years that now there seems to be a consensus to the other side of the coin?
I don't think that the consensus has changed. I mean, it's an informal. The data's not good. I'm a professor now, so you concerned about data. But at my church recently, we had a meeting of church leaders, and we were talking about different things in the community. And the census in the room was they didn't want the ordinance changed. They liked the idea of keeping people's pants up. So I'm not going to say the consensus has changed in the look from the community of what the standard is. I think people are much more sensitive now to over-aggressive policing or racially targeting policing. And when you see, something that should be a community standard across the board that is used in a racially divisive manner, people are sensitive to that because that's not what they expect. I mean, let me say this. We have speeding laws. If I enforce speeding laws in Broadmoor and Southern Trace and didn't do them in Cedar Grove or Moortown or the Martin Luther King area, or if I found white women that were driving Mercedes, and if they drove 1 mile over the speed limit and I arrested them, people would have an issue with why is it that this group of people are being targeted. That's not what we expect.
That's a great point.
And that's what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have the law isn't bad. The law is amoral. It's colorless. It's formless. It's a standard. It's a rule. This goes to the level of discretion that every police officer has and how they choose to exercise that discretion. And when you are clear, when your police chief says he's using a law that's meant for everybody, but he's using it only in one group of people, if that police chief is not willing to make the change, you have to take that quote-unquote tool out of his toolbox.
Calvin Lester.
And so that's where we are. So that's what I'm supporting.
Gotcha. Up against the clock now. I thank you so much for your time and being so candid. We appreciate it, sir.
Thank you very much.